Final Fight Streetwise is an interesting one, well, for me at least anyway, as it'd be one of those games that, yes, didn't get the best of reviews. If anything, it's often considered as one of the worst games on the console or even in any format, especially when you look at the transition from 2D games to 3D games, as it was based off a very popular series from way back. But to say that it's one of the worst games ever, I really don't think so. Now, everybody's expectations of what they want from games is very different, and sometimes I think people's expectations, in my own opinion, can be a bit over exaggerated, to say the least. But it is what you make of it at the end of the day. It's one of those games, however, if you're used to a particular format, sometimes people don't like the transition or the change that inevitably comes with series overall as time goes on, and it won't suit everybody, and it may not appeal to everybody, more to the point. And even I'll admit, there's sometimes I would class myself as one of those type of players that does like a particular format of a game. If I've played it originally and I enjoyed it, it does take a while to transition into a different format, and to some degree. Like, I was a big fan of the original game way back on the likes of the Super Nintendo, because at that time I would have been playing between that and even the likes of Streets of Rage on the Sega Mega Drive, and I'm a huge fan of Streets of Rage 2. For me, I put that down as one of my top 5 favourite games of all time, without question. Great looking game, one of the best soundtracks ever in video games, make no mistake, there's no argument there. It's just a fantastic game all round, and quite possibly the greatest beat 'em up ever made, well, in my opinion at least. But in saying that, going back to Final Fight Streetwise, it would be the last entry in the series that saw a release on the PlayStation 2 and Xbox in 2006 that would move away from the original 2D aesthetics of the original games to focus on more 3D beat 'em up gameplay. There was a 3D fighting game that was released way back on the Sega Saturn, but in Japan only, but having played that over the last while myself through emulation, graphically it's good, but it's one tough game to master, and it's not the best fighting game I've played really in that format. I found it to be very, very tricky and more so cumbersome and just frustrating more than anything else. Very, very hard to win matches. But even going back to this game here, it's funny, I remember when it was released originally, and I looked at the case. I remember going into local game stores and seeing it, and I thought it looked really cool, and because I'm a fan of the series in general, I thought to myself, you know what, it might be worth a try. But for some reason I just didn't get it at the time, but I did buy it a while later when the price came down on it. But the weird thing about it, this game, I don't know, for some reason I just didn't get into it when I first played it. For whatever reason, I played it for the first like half an hour or something like that, from what I remember when I first got it, and I think I got distracted with other games. And for some reason, I think it's weird, there's certain games that for whatever reason, regardless of whether people like it or they hate it. Now for me, I absolutely love this game. You might not believe it, but I do. But it was one of those games that when I played it first off, I wanted to like it, but it just didn't click with me at first. And I find that with a lot of games, and I'm sure many of you out there watching this have had that happen to you. And I think a lot of it boils down to that even though you have the game there in your catalogue or your library, the truth is that sometimes certain games, it's just not the right time to play them. It just doesn't have the same impact on you that it probably might have had. But in saying that, give it time, and if you find yourself coming back to it, you'll find that you might enjoy it. And that's what happened to me with this. But funny enough, that's where the story gets interesting for me, is that when I did finally get back to play this game, I didn't play this game for almost 2 years after buying it. It was literally sitting on my shelf collecting dust, and I'll be brutally honest, when I look at a lot of the games that I have here, that's still the case even today. Some of the best games I have played in my entirety of playing games for almost nearly 40 years. Now I am giving away my age to some degree, but some of the best games that I have played are the ones that I just couldn't get into at the start, but then I would come back, say a period of time later, either a couple of months later, a couple of weeks later, in some cases, in this case, a couple of years later, and suddenly things just click, and then you're like, I actually really like this game. Now I know the reviews didn't do the game justice, because there is elements in it that probably are a bit quirky and that wouldn't be to everybody's taste, even though it's a 3D beat 'em up, but it does have certain aesthetics. There is an arcade mode that has almost like a classic beat 'em up style, even though it's still in 3D, where you can play as the majority of characters from the game itself and even from previous games in the series. Now you have to complete the game to unlock everything. You will even unlock the original game as well to play once you do that, so there is some replay value within. But I found the story to be interesting, even though it may not appeal to everybody. It sees you take on the role of Kyle Travers, the younger brother of Cody from the original Final Fight games, that is a street fighter very like his brother, where you're competing in different tournaments. But the story takes a different turn because it is more story focused compared to other games, where Cody gets caught up in some sort of like illegal drug ring and he is kidnapped. So Kyle takes it upon himself to try and hunt down and find his brother and find those that are responsible, which will take you throughout the entirety of the local metro city that they grew up in, where you'll be exploring dark, dingy alleyways, streets, rundown buildings, warehouses, bars, even as far as other areas outside of town, where you'll interact with a whole host of different characters, some from the Final Fight universe, but even some from the Street Fighter universe, because this series of games was also based on that universe as well, which is interesting because later in the game, on one of the later chapters, you end up interacting with Cammy that was in Street Fighter 2, which I think is really cool because you also have to utilize various movesets and you'll upgrade your moves, which you can purchase from different like vendors or trainers. And when you meet her, she's also one of those trainers that will teach you different and specific moves that you can use, which you will need to fight against future bosses and more difficult enemies later in the game. But essentially this is an out and out action brawler. Now while the single player mode itself, the story mode, is a single player only experience, the beat 'em up elements in the arcade mode, you can play it with 2 players, but it is very, very difficult. I'm not going to say that it's an easy game because it's not, but I absolutely love the story of the game because not only are you running around the place trying to search for clues, you're also interacting with different environmental elements. You're trying to use and find money by winning fights or even just interacting with objects, completing side quests and objectives, which you will gain from interacting with other characters, where you'll have to help somebody out who's in trouble, or you'll have to search for items that people can use for whatever means or purposes, and in return you'll gain money from it, which you'll then need to buy items or buy health packs or to upgrade your movesets. So there's a bit of like an RPG element to it as well, which I really, really like, and I just love the visual aesthetic of it. I know it may not be to everybody's taste, and the levels themselves, while there is plenty of areas to explore, they're not overly vast in their size, but more areas will unlock the further you progress. However, when you want to save your progress in the game, you will have to quit, which will open up the save menu, but what it'll do is it will resume your play from the last checkpoint rather from the player's current position. So you just want to be mindful of that if you've completed any objectives in the meantime. Like, the story and the gameplay is interesting, while it may not be as appealing compared to other games of a similar style. I did really like it. I do enjoy it. I would go out on a limb and say that this is one of the most enjoyable games I ever played during my time of games on the PlayStation 2. For me, it's a hidden gem. While everyone else probably thinks it's a horrible game or a worst game, I don't think that at all. For me, it was just one of those games that I just didn't get into in the beginning. I did like it, but for whatever reason it just didn't click with me when I first played it, even though I knew I wanted to get into it. But somehow 2 years later, when I decided to sit down and play it, I ended up being so addicted to it that I ended up loving the experience altogether, and I still go back and play it every now and then. It may not be for everybody, and probably for a variety of reasons, maybe the story or the gameplay style, the visuals or whatever. Even I will admit there is some over the top elements with regard to some of the mini games and objectives, because some of the side quests will force you to get involved in mini game style approaches, from arm wrestling to even stomping cockroaches, using different types of puzzles, shooting quests, and even just bar brawls. Some of them are actually very funny, but they can be a little bit over the top, but it probably won't appeal to everybody. That's the one thing I would say. Now, I could be wrong. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there like myself that did enjoy this, regardless of its reviews. I know there's a lot of people out there that don't like it, but I genuinely did. It was one of my favourite games, and it was one of the most enjoyable experiences I had on the PlayStation 2. But again, once I gave it time, and once things finally clicked with me and I knew what to do, I loved playing the game. I still love playing the game even now. And the way I see it is, right, there's a different mix of variety of games on the console. Like, as we all know, the PlayStation 2 is home to one of the largest libraries of games ever in existence, and you do have anything from fantastic titles to mixed entries, mixed bags if you will, if you'd like to call it that way. But even among some of the games that are classed as really bad, I don't think they're all that bad. There's some real hidden gems there if you just give them time, and for me this was one of them. It just didn't click with me in the beginning, but over time, yes, it did, and I absolutely love playing this game. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, and I know a lot of people out there genuinely don't like to express that opinion because they're afraid of the backlash that they might get, but for me, I don't really care, because at the end of the day, some of the best games that I've ever played, and I do cover this on all of my other channels that I do cover, like my PS1 channel and all that, some of the greatest games I've ever played in my life are actually the ones that nobody else would even look at, or that they are completely overlooked to a degree. And yes, they're not perfect, they do have their flaws and they have their gripes or whatever, but there's some hidden quirks and gems in those games that just stand out, and for me just left such a lasting impact that I couldn't but not like it. And I think a lot of these games and the characteristics behind them, it really boils down to the player style, your preferences, but your own sense of humour and what you like and what you don't like. And luckily for me, a lot of the elements in these games I do enjoy, so I don't see it as a horrible game. If anything, for me it was one of the best games I ever played on the PS2. I know people might laugh at that, but I don't care. I really enjoyed this one, but again, it was one of those games that took a while to allow myself to get into it. But I suppose at the time I had so many other bloody games I was playing, and I find even that today with modern games, there's some games I still have here at home and I didn't play them for a long time either, but again, same thing happened. It was just not the right time time to play them, but when I did go to play them, just things just started to click and you're like, oh, I really enjoyed that. To give you an honest example of that would be Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. When it came out, I didn't play the game for almost a year and a half, and then I went and bought the gold edition on the PS4, and I still didn't play it. I didn't play the game for nearly 3 years after the game was released, and then all of a sudden when I did sit down to play it, I was like, holy crap, this game is phenomenal. I think for me it was just a transition, because as people and as humans we don't really particularly like change. I love the classic Resident Evil format, and then when I got to play the likes of Resident Evil 4, took a while to get used to, but I absolutely loved it, and I enjoyed Resident Evil 5, and I did like Resident Evil 6. I know it's probably not the best one, but I did like it. But then when Resident Evil 7 came out and I went in the first person, I was thinking to myself, you know what, I'm not sure if I would enjoy this. But then during that time, Resident Evil 2 remake had come out, and even the Resident Evil 3 remake had come out, and I was kind of like, you know what, these are awesome. But then I allowed myself to go back and to play Resident Evil 7, and I was like, this game is incredible. And that's the perspective. Sometimes you just have to give yourself time. I think what really it is there are some real hidden gems out there across all formats, and even on older game systems. There are some really, really cool games there that may not appeal to everybody in that moment, and they just may not be the right time to play them. But in time, you can always revisit them and then see what you think for yourself. Now, if they don't appeal to you even that point, then yeah, they're probably not the right game for you. But some of the best games, like I said, that I played are the ones that I didn't play in the beginning, and I left them for a while and I came back and I'm like, damn, this is a really good game. And truthfully, I don't care what anyone thinks. I really enjoy these types of games. The games that for me that just stand out, they're the games for me that make the biggest impact, because you don't expect them to be good, or you don't expect to even enjoy them. You think they'll be just another standard affair, but then you end up getting into them a lot more than you would think, and you're like, yeah, I really enjoyed that. And the funny thing is, they're not even the best or most polished games, and the truth is they don't have to be. It is what you make of it at the end of the day. Final Fight Streetwise, like I said here, it will appeal to certain types of players, but it won't appeal to everybody, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that dislike the game, but there is people out there that do like it, and I'm one of those people that does like it, and I still play it. Even getting back into recording footage for this video, it reminded me of how much I enjoyed this game and how much I wanted to sit down and play it, but then I was kind of like, right, I want to kind of move on because I have other videos I want to make and so forth. I want to utilise my time more effectively, but that's not to say that I don't want to go back and play this, because out of all the games that I have been covering in recent videos that I've been recording, I still want to go back and play this one equally as much as anything else I've been playing recently. So that'll tell you how much of an impact that it has had on me as a player. I really do enjoy this game, and I would definitely go out on a limb, like I said, and put this down as one of my favourite games on the PlayStation 2, and I do not care what anyone says. It's a very interesting game. Yes, it won't appeal to everybody, like I keep saying, but it will appeal to those select few out there that like quirkiness in games. This has that. But regardless of what I think, it will be interesting to hear your thoughts of this, whether you liked it or not. It's an interesting game nonetheless, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around more unusual and quirky games like this that were also released on the PlayStation 2, then I've covered a lot more of them here on this playlist, which you can check out.